Ivan, start the tank! I can't, we're out of gasoline! Well, use vodka instead! Ivan, think with your head! Спасибо, товарищ! Vodka, давай! This is two Russian tankists talking about how they can start a tank without gasoline. Today we will learn about Russian tanks, Soviet tanks, where did they start and where have they advanced. The venerable Russian Armata. Well, if you didn't know, it doesn't exist. It exists on paper and they have made like 10 tanks, but they will never mass produce it, so it's not officially and never will be on the battlefield. It's just a paper tiger to make the Western enemies afraid. And they were afraid and they're making powerful tanks and they actually can mass produce them. So Russia has caused Germany, France and USA and England make new, more powerful tanks to match the Armata, except Armata doesn't exist, but these new Western tanks will exist. But yes, let's learn how did Russia got to Armata, what came before, from the first Soviet tank. So this is a history lesson definitely. Oh, before we go, of course, Patreons, we cannot forget them, we never skip them. Patrons are the people who keep this channel going, and for me, you're just up there, I see all of the patrons, I'm like, take my good energy because you have given me so much, I want to give something back. So I'm reading three new patrons for you today. We have Michelle E. Kraske. Michelle A. Kraske, thank you for supporting the channel. We have Scott Bevins, Mr. Scott. Appreciate it. Finally, we have Joshua Prado. Thank you for becoming a Patreon. If you want to support the channel and if you like my videos, please become a patron of this channel and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Alright, Mr. Russian Tank, let's see, where do you come from?
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson,
and
the
armchair historian.
Few nations embraced the invention of the tank with as much vigor as the Soviet Union. Building on the experiments performed by the Russian Empire in the closing days of the First World War, the Soviet Union constantly sought to improve its armored capability.
I'm sorry, I gotta say, I love armchair historian. I love the way he speaks slowly and nice, and he always has this nice shirt and nice haircut. And I like the topics, I like this. This is a very good channel.
Fielding some of the most well-known tanks in military history throughout the Second World War. With the war's end, the Soviets only increased their research and development, preparing for a possible conflict with their ideological enemies and equipping their enhanced tanks with the latest armor and personnel protection technology. This spirit of armored innovation continues in the present day, with the Russian Federation continuing to build on the works of the...
Well, the problem nowadays is that, yes, they pretend to build new tanks so everybody thinks they have these powerful tanks, but they don't have the capability to produce microchips and nanotechnology. And at all, any Russian technology is quite horrible. So, Soviet tanks were full of metal. They had modern technologies, they're worse technologies than the Western tanks. Russia is the same. So nowadays, yes, they can, no, we have new tanks, Armata tank on paper. Very good. Bring it to the battlefield, then I'll believe you.
The Red Army. In this second episode of our Evolution of Tanks series, we'll look at the growth of Russian armor from lightning-quick scout tanks imported as farming equipment to the armored juggernauts of the Soviet Union and beyond. The scale of both Soviet and modern Russian tank production and development is truly dizzying, so we will just be examining the key turning points in each tank design, both for the sake of brevity and preventing our animators from launching a workers' revolution of their own.
Yeah.
Additionally, we'll be focusing on tanks exclusively and will not be covering small armored vehicles, tank destroyers, or self-propelled guns.
It's a different story.
With that said, let's begin.
I gotta say a small fact here, Estonia doesn't have any tanks. Not a single one. The same way Latvia and Lithuania, not a single tank. We three Baltic states are without tanks, so if you're watching from a nation that has tanks, send them to us via Gmail, please. That's Minecraft tank. That's a Minecraft tank.
Like her continental peers, the Russian Empire began experimenting with armored warfare during the First World War. In August of 1914, designer Alexander Porokhovchikov was tasked with creating an all-terrain vehicle for the Tsar's army. The result of his labors was the Vezdikot, literally translating as all-terrain vehicle. With a reputed top speed of 42.6 kilometers per hour and iron armor plating, the Vezdikot is the first of a handful of Russian tanks that are poorly understood. Little information survives about this Tsarist experiment. The Vezdikot project was carried out in spurts between 1914 and 1916, ultimately ending in the October of that year. With the fall of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, international trade disputes resulted in American weapons designer Walter J. Christie inking a deal to sell his design for a fast tank to the Red Army. The first of these American tanks were built and shipped to the Soviet Union as agricultural tractors to skirt an arms embargo.
A tank, you can use it as a tractor, you just have to put the, I don't know how to call it, I don't know English agricultural language, but you put the right things behind it and they will plow your fields and sow your seeds with a tank. Yeehaw! That's the American way.
Communist state. Thanks to its Christie suspension system, the B-2 had incredible mobility, and a simple field modification allowed the fragile tracks to be removed, letting the wheels run directly on paved surfaces, enabling top speeds of up to 55 kilometers or 34 miles per hour. 4 years after the B-2's adoption, the Red Army slowly replaced it with the BT-7, which remained in service until the end.
Can you imagine Red Army in 1931 bought tanks from USA? It is true, I'm not talking this to offend the US, but it's ironical how US actually has sold weapons to most of its enemies. Taliban, Al-Qaeda, everybody. And it has sold weapons to Soviet Union.
End of the Second World War. The BT-7 could reach a top speed of 86 kilometers or 53 miles per hour
That's
on
really
road
fast.
and 50 kilometers or 31 miles per hour.
That's car
off-road.
fast.
The BT-20 light tank was introduced in 1938 as a pre-production model for the T-34. 2 main variants were produced, the BT-20 or A-20 and the A-32 or T-32. The A-20 mounted a 45mm main gun and weighed in at 31 tons. The variant also featured sloped armor and a larger, simplified hull to aid in
35mm main gun. That is not for other tanks, that is just anti-infantry vehicle. That is, you couldn't down anything else with it, I think. Just anti-infantry. But you didn't need much more back then, I think.
in protection and manufacturing, respectively. The A-32 added 2 more wheels on each track and widened the tracks themselves. Full armor was thickened across the board, and the caliber of the main gun was upgraded to a 76.2
Oh, now we're
mm
talking 76 that can take down other tanks also, and it would destroy infantry. This is a first tank, I would say.
10. The A-32 was a limited production model, similar to its successor. The A-32 served as the basis for the T-34, laying the foundation for one of the most effective tanks in military history, which made its debut following the outbreak of the Second World War.
T-34 effective. I gotta say, the tank is cost effective, but not effective. It is a shitty tank. The problem was Soviets could produce them so fast and so many that it doesn't matter how many Tigers or Panzers that Germany produced. They had 10 T-34s against them for each tank, so Soviets just outproduced them. But the tank itself was horrible. I've seen a T-34 in a museum. It's a bloody horrible tank. There's no precision to it. If you throw a Molotov and it has really cracks on every metal part, it just goes right in there. But they could produce them so cheap and so fast, just overrun everything with it. But it's definitely not an effective tank. It's cost effective.
Variants of the T-34 would serve across the globe in conflicts ranging from World War II to Korea. There were many variants produced, but here are the most notable. The basic Model 1940 T-34 saw action from 1940 to 1944 and carried a crew of 4 with an L11 76.2mm main gun.
I think it's the most produced tank in the world. They produced so many of them. It's crazy how fast they could pop out. I don't know, but I would say one tank every 10 minutes. Yeah, no, I don't know.
Like the T-32 that preceded it. Weighing in at 26.8 tons and with between 16 and 52 millimeters of armor thickness, the T-34 could reach a top speed of 54 kilometers per hour or 33.5 miles per hour as it pushed back the tide of Nazi aggression. The 1943 T-34, dubbed the T-34-85, saw increases across the board, adding an additional crew member and bringing armor thickness in selective areas up to 80 millimeters. This extra protection...
But this tank, I don't think it could still take a hit from a Panzer or a Tiger.
...led to a sharp increase in weight at 32 tons, but reduced speeds of 38 kilometers or 23 miles per hour. The 1943 model also increased the size of the main gun, bringing the caliber up to 85 millimeters. In 1945...
Yeah, you can read this here. German tanks were better in any way. In every part, German tanks were better, except for the fact that they couldn't mass produce them. But they were just better tanks.
The T-34-85 was outfitted with an electrically driven traverse motor for the turret, greatly enhancing its ability to engage moving targets.
57,000 built! 57,600! This shows you how many they can build. They started building them only at the start of World War II. This shows you the might of Soviet heavy industry. They never had the might for technology, but they could build these robust tanks like crazy.
In a chaotic battlefield environment. Over 57,600 of these motorized turret tanks would be built before the war's end. The final T-34 variant added night driving gear and an enlarged fuel tank to bring the war-weary platform into the modern age. The T-44 tank was brought into service beginning in 1944. While originally intended to build on the T-34, the final product ended up being a complete redesign. Weighing in at 31 tons, and with 4 crew members, the tank featured an impressive 120mm maximum armor thickness. A total of 1,823 tanks were built from 1944, but none saw service during the Second World War. 1961 saw the T-44M roll off of the assembly line, the first in a long line of retrofitted tanks with the letter M designated for modernized. The T-44M was refitted with increased ammunition and fuel capacity, as well as night vision and infrared sights, enabling it to...
Yeah, okay, they had night vision and infrared, but they were at its infants, that technology. It was an edge if the enemy didn't have it, but as we could see in the Battle of 72 Easting, or many battles before that, where the Abrams fought T-72s, which had night vision and infrared, but they were just, compared to American technology, it's shit. Soviets and Russians, they cannot build technology. So yes, this is a good edge here, but I bet Western powers had it before.
To fight in any situation. The T-54 succeeded the T-44, going on to become the most widely used tank throughout the Eastern Bloc. Over 35,000 were built, and modernizations and adaptations kept the model in regular use through the 1990s and possibly even into the 2020s. The T-54 shared a similar armor layout as its predecessor, but now utilized...
probably even to the 2020s. I think Russia still has these tanks in their army, Russian army, and Ukraine has these tanks. Ukraine had Soviet Union's tank factories, they made them, those tanks. Talking about how old school is Russian tanks, then they have T-72s, and I think they have these also nowadays. Now, this is not a fact, this is my opinion, but knowing how Russians use their military, they don't really modernize them, they might have those, which are super outdated.
Utilized a torsion bar suspension system with redesigned treads. An articulated gun sight and anti-aircraft machine gun were additional features added to the base design over time. In 1954, the Red Army used the T-54 platform to test the D-54TS 100mm main gun paired with a Raduga stabilizer. This modernization project, the T-54M, would serve as a blueprint for future T-54 designs as models began integrating separate stabilization systems and also began being identified with alphabetic suffixes. In 1957, the T-54B took the field, armed with a new rifled gun and a second-generation STP stabilizer, while improved survivability was provided by standardized self-sealing fuel tanks. 1959 saw the addition of infrared optics. An infrared searchlight was mounted on the commander's cupola, and the gunner was given an IR sight to allow target acquisition in any level of light. The T-55 tank built on many of the innovations of the T-54.
As you can see, every next tank is built less. First one was 46,000, the second one was 35, this is 27,000 made. This shows you that tanks go, yes, stronger, bigger, but they will build less of them. But also, Soviet industry might lessons and lessons.
With a new focus on protection and survivability in all manner of combat conditions. The base T-55 was a formidable fighting vehicle, with a plethora of improvements over the T-54, such as an improved engine and a full complement of nuclear, biological, and chemical safeguards inspired by nuclear blast tests performed on the T-54. Over 27,500 units were produced over the course of the model's service life. During the 1970s and 80s, the T-55 underwent a veritable maelstrom of improvements. Under the model names T-55M and T-55AM, the tank was outfitted with increased armor and anti-mine defenses, an upgraded engine, new tracks and suspension, a laser rangefinder fitted onto the main gun, 81mm smoke grenade launchers for concealment, and many other improvements. A notable sub-variant was the T-55 modified for service in Afghanistan, which was given soft side skirts over its tracks and a rear RPG screen to counter the conditions of the Soviets' battle against the Taliban and other militants.
Yeah, this seems good on paper, but if you want to know how the Soviets did against Taliban, who are effectively farmers with Kalashnikovs and RPGs, well then, at the time, the biggest professional standing army, which was the Red Army, lost to the farmers. Like the US lost in Vietnam, but the Soviets lost worse in Afghanistan. It was just a humiliation. And this tank didn't help because you cannot do anything with tanks in the mountain when the Taliban could be behind every rock with a RPG, and the RPG actually takes down this tank. It's not that strong yet. In the future, T-72s and above that RPGs might not take down, but this one they could. So they did. And the Red Army lost to a bunch of farmers with Kalashnikovs. I don't know why we see this happening in history. Same in Vietnam.
The 1990s saw a revolution in tank defense with the introduction of explosive reactive armor,
This
where
is
a layer of
anti-RPG.
explosive material is sandwiched between the sheets of armor plating. When struck by a shell or any projectile, the sandwiched explosive will detonate, ideally destroying the shell before it can penetrate the armor and kill the crew inside.
That is very
The
effective.
T-55 received
That armor is the problem we have here in Estonia, because our infantry has Carl Gustav, that's an anti-tank. We also have javelins, very good, but we have Carl Gustav also very widely spread here in Estonia, which is just a propelled rocket going straight into the tank, and this active armor can defend against it, which it's bad. Yeah, so we need more javelins.
Its first outfitting of ERA with the T-55MV and the AMV, which were initially adopted by the Soviet naval infantry before spreading to its newly formed ground forces of the Russian Federation following the Soviet Union's collapse. Introduced in tandem with the T-55 was the 1961's T-62, of which 22,700 were built. Created as an answer to the British Centurion and American Patton tanks, the T-62 had a 100...
You see how tanks in the Cold War were created for an answer to each other. The Americans made a new tank, the Soviets had to make a new tank. The Soviets made a new tank, the British and French they had to make a new tank. The Russians now announced their Armata on paper, videos, everything looked perfect. The thing is, now the Western powers have to make a new tank to conquer the Armata, and the Western powers actually can build a new tank. So the Russians have made the Western powers make even more powerful tanks without being able to make more powerful tanks. So this is how the Cold War, right now it's not a Cold War, but it's still a little bit. We can already see who is losing.
115mm smoothbore cannon firing new kinetic energy penetrator rounds. With a 102mm frontal plate angled at a 60-degree angle and a turret up to 214mm thick in some places, the T-62 had excellent armor for its day. It was eventually modernized as the T-62M. Equipped with a Volna rangefinder, improved sights, and a ballistic computer. 10mm of armor was added to the tank's side skirts, and improved NBC protection completed the overhaul. 1963 saw the introduction of the T-64 platform. 12,000 of the base tanks were built, notable for their sharp increase in armor thickness, a maximum of 599mm, and the reduction of crew from the standard 4 to 3. The first refresh for the T-64 came in 1966, with the introduction of the T-64A. The main gun was scaled up to 125mm from an initial caliber of 115mm, with a new rangefinder and sights. Additionally, a new turret was introduced for the commander, as well as an anti-aircraft gun. Intended as the second-generation main battle tank for the Soviet armed forces, this
I think this is the most famous modern Soviet or Russian tank, and they have a lot of those still in Russia. Most of the tanks they have nowadays, I think, are T-72s.
1.5-ton behemoth was armed with a 125mm main gun, as
tank.
well as a 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun and a coaxial 7.62 machine gun for anti-infantry duties. The BA variant of the T-72 added ERA in the form of Contact 1 composite plates arrayed along the turret and hull. The T-72 would go on to receive upgrades to its contact armor throughout its useful life, up until the modern-day T-72B3 introduced thermal sighting for improved target acquisition in all manner of conditions. First produced in 2014, the T-72B3 can still be found in Russian armored units today. Introduced in 1976, the T-80A was an amalgam of new parts and components from the T-72 and the T-64. The driver's position shifted to the center of the crew compartment, with the other two crew positioned inside a new two-man turret. ERA and NBC protection came standard, and over 5,000 T-80As
This tank came in 1976. At the time, Soviet Union was already losing its momentum on heavy industry. It was falling behind on agriculture and heavy industry and everything. The 60s and 50s, they didn't. They were actually as good with agriculture and heavy industry. They were competing with the US, but now they're strongly falling behind because Brezhnev is the leader of the Soviet Union, and Brezhnev was a horrible leader. He didn't do anything. The time of Brezhnev is known as stagnation of everything. So at this time you can see 5,400 built. They just didn't have the power anymore. And from this point on, the Soviet Union just goes down the drain.
Were produced. T-80U, short for Uluchenya or improved, sported the Contact 5 ERA system as well as an improved engine, leading to increased survivability, range, and service life. The T-90 tank was introduced as the third-generation main battle tank for the nascent Russian Federation. 2,260 of these 45.7-ton tanks were built, mounting a 125mm main gun along anti-tank missile capability. The Russian government has released little other information about the T-90, which continues to serve to this day. The latest model, the T-90AM, features a smoothbore 2A46M5 gun, as well as upgrades to its armor and engine.
This tank exists. This is a good tank. It is a little bit outdated compared to the Western tanks, the newest ones. It is outdated. I think Abrams could take it on any day of the week. But this is the last tank that actually exists in the Russian army.
Our last medium tank was introduced in 2015. The T-14 Armata is the cutting edge of Russian
2,300 built. Where do you get your information?
MBT design. 900mm of armor protects its crew of 3, who operate a 2A82 smoothbore gun and 12.7mm cord machine gun and 7.
This is a tank. Then where it came out, it was shown at the parade, and it didn't start. At the most important parade where all Western powers, everybody were watching, it didn't start. It failed. Even the showcase of this tank failed. So this tank does not exist effectively in the army. 2,300 is a propaganda number to frighten the Western allies to build more tanks, and they will, and they have new and better tanks.
62mm purpose-built tank machine gun. The turret is entirely mechanized, which eliminates the positions of the gunner and loader traditionally found in tank crews. Production for the model was planned to reach 2,300 between 2015 to 2020, with
that's a high goal. With 5 years to produce 2,300 of these, it is a challenge for the USA, but for the Russian Federation, it's impossible.
A test batch of 100 to be issued to the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division in 2021. The first of Russia's heavy tank designs, the T-28, featured a crew of 5 and later 6 men operating a 76.2mm howitzer and
6 men inside one tank.
between 3 to 5 7.62mm machine guns. A rolling gun position, the T-28 was protected by 20 to 30mm of overall armor thickness. 503 units were produced between 1932 and 1941. A sterling example of the short-lived trend of outfitting massive tanks with multiple turrets, the T-35 could be best described as a land battleship, with a total of 5 gun turrets covering massive arcs of fire. More of a propaganda tool than a weapon of war, T-35 units rumbled into action during Operation Barbarossa, only to promptly break down en masse and be scuttled by their crews to prevent capture by the Germans.
That is actually the story of almost all Russian tanks fighting against Germany. The point is, even T-34, they broke down a lot, but they produced so many of them, it didn't matter. They won the war, so it didn't matter. But if you look at this, and if the Russians would have lost the war, we would talk about how these T-34s and these tanks, they broke down down, they were really bad. The temperature inside of them went up to like 60 degrees Celsius, 80, 70 degrees Celsius, which is impossible to work in. We don't talk about these things because they won the war.
The KV heavy tank first debuted in 1939. The base tank had a production run of 100 units, each armed with a 76mm cannon and 5 crew. 25 to 90mm of armor made the tank an extremely tough nut to crack. The second generation KV-1B, introduced in 1940, added an additional machine gun as well as an improved cannon. The 1B was a simplified design, intended for mass production, and 1,200 were built.
Ooh,
now,
nice.
Behold, the Russian Death Fridge. Introduced in 1940, the KV-2 proved more than effective against the Wehrmacht during the defense of the Soviet Union, topping out at 57.5 tons and mounting a 152mm howitzer as its main gun. This 6-man juggernaut helped stop the German invasion cold.
That's a strong one.
First introduced in 1943, the IS series of heavy tanks served as a testbed for the latest in Soviet and later Russian design philosophy, eventually leading to the modern T-10 system. The IS-1 was based on the KV-85 and sought to address the mobility and armament problems the KV line had developed while taking advantage of the armor trade-offs and design choices made in the previous series. At 43 tons, and with a crew of 4, the IS-1 mounted an 85mm main gun.
It's a truly heavy tank, so it's a bit slower. Its max speed is 37 kilometers per hour, and it usually went even slower. So it's almost, if you jog fast, this is the speed of this tank. It's a very slow tank, but it's probably very hard to kill.
Complemented by 3 7.62 machine guns. 120mm of frontal armor protected the hull and turret. Introduced later in 1943, the IS-2 was designed specifically to counter German heavy tanks, with 3,800...
Now this I believe this tank could take down the German heavy tanks, but none of that before, none of the other T-34s, and they couldn't.
154 of these purpose-built cat killers rolling off of the assembly line. A 122mm main gun promised to deal heavy damage to Nazi armor, and a Dishka anti-aircraft machine gun warded off any Luftwaffe attackers. Just a year after the introduction of the IS-2 came the IS-3, first unveiled during the Allied Victory Parade in Berlin. The IS-3 had an all-new armor layout and a distinctive pike-nose turret that offered excellent protection. Introduced in 1952, the penultimate version of the Soviets' heavy tank platform began its life as the IS-9, later rechristened the IS-10, and then the T-10 in 1953 as part of the de-Stalinization program of Nikita Khrushchev. Over 5,000 of these tanks were built, featuring a 122mm main gun and 2 12.7mm machine guns, as well as 250mm of armor at its thickest. The final version of the Soviets' heavy tank program, the T-10M, was completed in 1957. Modernizations included replacing one machine gun with a 14.5mm cannon, as well as integrating night vision optics and NBC protection in the platform.
I think this is a good tank. It's hard to kill, it's faster and it's stronger, and I would be afraid of this tank, yes, at the time. Nowadays it would be an easy work.
A longer hull and turret accommodated a larger gun with an integral muzzle brake. The net result was a massive vehicle that was ultimately abandoned in favor for other tank designs.
Wow, that was a long video, but we got a whole view of the Soviet tank history, and I like it. I like to learn things like that. If you're a Russian viewer, I'm sure this video is hard for you to watch if I always bitch about how broken these things were, and I'm sorry. If you know Estonian history, you know Soviet and Estonian and Russian and Estonian, they don't go along well. My family has suffered also, so you know I'm biased. Of course I am, I'm not gonna hide it. It's okay to be biased. If you're Russian, you're biased towards Russia. We just learned about a tank right here, nothing else. So my friends, thank you for watching, thank you for being on this channel and subscribing and being a Patreon. Warms my heart. And as always, until my next video, stay cool